Yeah.
So it is 2:01, everyone. Welcome, everyone, to our Open Access Week webinar. It is a very great pleasure to me to share this screen and this Zoom room with all of you, and especially with our panelists. But first, my name is Yvonne Lujano. I am a third-year doctoral student in the EPE program, the Educational and Evaluation Program at Mary Lou Fulton Teachers College. And also, I am currently one of the associate editors of the journal Current Issues in Education, or CIE, which is a peer-reviewed publication produced by doctoral students in our college. So today we will have a chance to have this conversation with our panelists, Dr. Gustavo Fischman from MLFTC, Anali Perry, which is our scholarly communication librarian, and Dr. Kimberly from the Center for Gender Equity in Science and Technology. So before getting started, I'd like to say a couple of things about what open access and what open access are, because maybe not all of you are familiar with these terms and with these concepts. So first, open access is a scholarly publishing model where the readers do not have to pay any fees for accessing and reusing materials that are produced and peer-reviewed in research institutions. Open access removes also the barriers of price and the barriers of copyrights, which means that the users have some rights to reuse the materials. But open access is not synonymous of universal access or universal equity. It is just a step for achieving this goal. So this year, Open Access Week theme is it matters how we open knowledge, building structural equity. So this theme invites us to reflect on what is still challenging in terms of having access to information, giving our outputs for the common good, maybe, etc. And that's what we will discuss now with our panelists. So we are having also in the chat another associate editor. Her name is Blair. Blair is going to be here with you. Okay. Thank you very much, Blair, for introducing yourself there in the chat. And my apologies about the call. It was supposed to be on the panelist list, but well, she's going to help us to monitor the chat, and your questions and comments. You can use the Q&A or the chat features on your Zoom screen. And also, well, Blair is going to help us to share some links. For instance, the link for our journal, the CIE journal, which maybe some of you are just about to start exploring. I will invite you to explore the journal, use the journal, look at our issues, what we publish. We are an education journal. It's not a specialized journal, so we cover many different topics, methodologies, theoretical approaches. It is really a general education journal, and we have some manuscripts to in the process, in the pipeline, and we are expecting to have some articles published this year. Like we're hoping to have it before the year ends. So we are a team of people, and you can find everything about the journal in our website. The website and the system that we use is an open source website, so it is kind of also part of other strategies that Mary Lou Fulton Teachers College have in terms of open access. So I'm going to introduce the panelists, and they're going to have 5 to 7 minutes to talk about their experiences, and they are going to mention how they came to this community of open access, how they started to get involved with this, how they started to advocate for open access. And first we have Dr. Gustavo Fischman. He's a professor of educational policy and comparative education at Fulton Teachers College at ASU. And his work is focused on understanding and improving the processes of knowledge production and exchange between scholars, educators, activists, practitioners, administrators, and media workers. It's kind of the idea of mobilizing knowledge. So Gustavo, I'm gonna set the timer, and thank you very much for being here first.
It is unusual to start complaining. Yeah, that is in bad taste. So apologies for the bad taste, but we agreed 3 minutes ago that I wasn't going to be first, but that's okay.
Oh, sorry, I was distracted maybe with looking for Blair, but anyways, I'm so sorry. But...
That's okay. Apologies. So as some of you may know, I'm from Argentina, and in Latin America in general, the access to scholarly productions has always been perceived, or was one of the goals of people in public universities. And public universities, the notion of the public here is very important. We always have this idea that the public, the state, the taxes, our families pay for our education. And then there was an ethical obligation to return the knowledge produced with the support of all the people in the countries. I know it's a very lofty, diffuse idea, but that is what we believe for a long time. We didn't know that that was open access. So we always make this kind of a ironic comment that open access was invented in Latin America, Asia, Africa, and then it arrives to the Anglo-Saxon world. So I grew up with that idea that if I do research supported with that, with public funds, I have the ethical obligation to make that knowledge accessible. But for us, accessible at that time was to put it in the library. that was the idea. It's like, how do you make things accessible? Well, you deposit your book, chapters, articles at the library. And because the libraries were very important, it's like nobody had, well, nobody. Most of the students, we were workers. So we didn't buy books. Sometimes we stole books, but most likely we were to the library to read the books there. Forward 20 years later, when I arrived to ASU, there was a professor, very influential, very esteemed, and a very gracious scholar, Dr. Jim Glass, that started in 1992 a newsletter that was the first digital newsletter in education, that then became a journal. That's Education Policy Analysis Archives, that next year is going to be the 30th anniversary of continuous publication. And so the college is the main supporter of 3 of the best known journals in education that are open access and that have continuous publication. So there was an immediate affinity with this idea of making, facilitating, or being involved with a journal and with a model of publication that kind of embrace the ideal that we have in many parts or by many faculty, students in Latin American universities, of making our knowledge accessible. Open access doesn't resolve all the problems. It creates other problems too, but I still believe in the ethical demand that we cannot avoid, we cannot escape. If we are doing research and we do some scholarship that is supported with public funds, the individual researchers and the institutions must do their best to make that knowledge accessible, usable, engageable, debatable, but that we cannot escape that ethical demand. To put it in open access repositories, in open access journals, is a pretty good strategy. It doesn't resolve all the problems, but it's much better than to hide the knowledge behind paywall journals. And everybody, we have the enormous benefit of having the COVID vaccines as fast as we have, because all the research, even the research that was published in paywall journals, was made open access. And so that was the policy recognition, acknowledgement that open access is a pretty good strategy. So thank you.
Thank you, Gustavo. You did it very good at the time. Yeah, thank you very much. And I'm sorry that I didn't hear the order that you decided, but no, let me know who is next. And thank you very much. I just want to say, if you have comments on what Gustavo just said, you can put questions or comments on the chat, but we will have also a Q&A session and other questions for the panel. So who's next?
I think it's me.
Okay, thank you, Anali.
So I think it's really interesting to talk a little bit about how we became involved with open access, because for me, it was really at the beginning of my professional career as a librarian. It was kind of a new thing. I graduated from my grad program with my master's in library science in 2005. And this was really kind of when there was a lot of conversation in the library world about what we call the serial crisis. And I think one of the things that initially tied librarians into this movement is fundamentally a price issue. As the economics of journal publishing in a print world were really very simple. You pay for a journal subscription, you get a copy of the journal. And it was, per journal essentially, or we could do a bunch, but it was pretty straightforward because you get a print version of the journal. And as libraries, we knew we always paid a higher cost for a subscription than an individual would. So if Gustavo was subscribing to a journal for $25 as a faculty member, the library would probably pay $150, which made sense because we knew it would be a lot of other people would be looking at that journal as opposed to just one person. When journals started moving online, they started realizing, okay, so they need to figure out some way to increase costs to pay for their digital platforms, their electronic publishing processes. But then it also became very clear that a lot of that funding goes towards building a wall to keep only certain people accessing their content. Because you all know, as students and individuals, that the easiest thing in the world is to put something up on the internet and have people access it for free. It's a lot harder programmatically to build walls around that content and limit access to that content to only certain people. So that is a really important piece to journal publishing platforms as we emerge into a digital environment. Secondly, journal publishers didn't know how to translate this cost from a print environment into a digital one. Librarians weren't quite sure how to translate that cost. And fundamentally, the economics around journal publishing is broken in that libraries pay for subscriptions, faculty and students read them, but faculty and students don't pay the cost aside from tuition or being subsidized by the university in some way. They're really divorced from that reality. And libraries try to get access to all the information. The number of journals grows and grows and grows. The costs and inflation costs per journal have skyrocketed, like way past the cost of, of normal inflation, consumer price index. And fundamentally, there is no library in the world today that could afford to subscribe to every journal that they need to have access to, like flat out. Harvard can't do it, we can't do it, none of the richest institutions could do it. So libraries really got involved because essentially we were broke. We could no longer pay for this content that people needed to have access to. As I've been in this field, I've also become more and more aware about, okay, the publishing landscape, the economics behind that, the amount of donated labor and content from students, faculty, researchers, and authors who contribute to the scholarly landscape, to the way we communicate and disseminate knowledge, and that we all need to build off of. That labor is free. And journal publishers take that content, that labor, and they sell it back. And, again, there's not necessarily things wrong with some of this, except that there's an awful lot of free labor being donated, not an actual realization of the cost and benefits to the people that really need it. And fundamentally, a lot of big walls in front of stuff that makes it really hard to get access to the knowledge that people need. So I have become, a very active open access advocate. In my role as a scholarly communication librarian, one of my goals is to try to make sure that and advocate for that the people who need access to that information should be able to have it. And where would be more appropriate places for the cost to lie? All of you are scholars and researchers who want your work to benefit the world, to have a positive impact. And so where are you going to put it to make sure that it actually reaches the people that need to see it? And there's, as Gustavo said, there are still a lot of issues and problems. We've replicated a lot of the same issues in traditional publishing in open access publishing, which shifts costs from maybe not the library, but to an individual author. Publishers are now working with libraries to add on an open access cost to pay for the authors to publish, but that is inevitably going to take us back to where we were with unsustainable subscription costs. I know that may be kind of complicated in economic sort of way. There's just a lot of pieces there, but it does cost a little money, as especially all of our editors who are working on CIE. It takes time. It takes a lot of effort to take a journal through publication. And how do we recognize and acknowledge those costs? So I might have gone over a little bit, but that's essentially how I got to this place.
Thank you so much. And thanks for pointing out about the labor and the work, because that is very important to remember that the open access is not free. But okay, so Kimberly, are you ready?
I hope so.
Okay.
Good afternoon, everybody. So, I mean, for me, the idea of open access is an important one, because as a center director, even though I'm a professor first, but as a center director, we often host 1 to 3 postdocs to work in the center on an annual basis. And the postdocs, like so many of us who are voluntarily going into academic positions, are keenly interested and concerned about publications. And so in that sense, there's this continuous tension of how do I, as let's say a postdoc, contribute in an organized way to a body of knowledge so that my contribution will incite an exchange of ideas, perhaps move a field forward or ignite a new conversation to go in an innovative path. But one of the things that continuously causes me to take note of the conversations and dialogues about open access are a couple of things. Now, first, when I think about open access, I'm not only thinking about access to articles. I'm thinking about open science resources, which can include certainly articles, but also codes, software, commentaries, data, digital scholarship, monographs, non-peer-reviewed reports, registered reports, analysis plans, theses and dissertations. And I see that having access to these types of resources is certainly important and impactful because it can influence pedagogy. It can influence public policy. It can increase or even slow down the pace of discovery. And I think most importantly, it can affect the public confidence in science, whether it's social science, natural or life sciences. But most of, at least it's in my view, most of the attempts at open access assume a diversity approach and seem to say, well, you know what, if we make these resources, some of which I've named, available to a more diverse audience, and we've done good. But what I'm encouraging, and similar to what Gustavo was saying, is I'm trying to think about open access and how we should consider other elements of it through a theoretical lens. You know, because diversity, I often say, is about, you know, okay, who's in the room, but equity is looking at practices and policies that are preventing certain people from being in the room, as well as encouraging others to be. And so when I think about open access, are we assuming an equitable approach, whereas we're attempting to change practices that preclude some authors and institutions from engaging in open access initiatives? So a couple things to consider. One, we know no technology is a true disruptor. I think Yvonne did a really, really good job at the beginning in saying how open knowledge towards equity. Well, I think we need to recognize open access in and of itself is not necessarily going to lead to a disruption. No technology is going to be. I think about Patricia Hill Collins, and I'm coming from an intersectional framework, how if we are as scholars thinking about resistance knowledge projects, then we should be thinking about how our work is going to change the systemic barriers rather than simply how they're going to contribute to them. So does open access change the systemic barriers, whereas certain people have access and some don't? Second, let's be real, COVID. We know that disproportionately women and women of color were assuming greater household duties during COVID, which led to lower productivity. And I'm sure Gustavo and Anali can talk more about this. Also, our participation in being peer reviewers. And so if we think about those two unfortunate results, is open access, while it's great in theory, but how is it going to change what we had to experience thanks to one of the two pandemics that our world just experienced? Third, open access to whom? Open access to whom? We know, thanks to American Indian Policy Institute, as well as Pew Research, that, for example, 1 in 5 residents on an American Indian reservation have access to the internet. So even though if we have every fantastic and empirically based article about, let's say, American Indian life on the reservation, only 1 in 5 people are going to have access to that. So open access for whom? And then lastly, and Anali brought up this point, this conflict between the paywall versus publication wall. And so, I mean, institutions and individuals, while they may receive subsidies from their libraries or even their own institutions, we know from data that certain institutions, meaning the ones that are not research intensive, do not have as much money to provide those authors, or again, postdocs or graduate students, to publish on open access platforms. Again, whether those publications be data or methodologies or reports. And so I'll just close in saying, I think open access is absolutely a phenomenal theoretical idea. And I encourage us all to think about open access through a lens of equity rather than one of diversity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kimberly, and for setting the stage for this debate, because you highlighted so many things that makes a lot of sense that this year topic is about structural equity, right? And it's a matter of that goes beyond technologies, that goes beyond the prices of the information, that goes beyond the work and labor. It is a very complex situation that we have, especially as you mentioned, with this pandemic, we opened the black box of open access too, right? Like who is behind these wonderful projects and like initiatives that really are putting so much effort on making resources something publicly available for all. But there are so many challenges in terms of who does the job and who gets paid, who gets recognized, etc. So thank you very much for all of these wonderful reflections. And I would like to invite the participants to write out your questions, prepare or share it already there in the chat or the Q&A. But we have prepared also as an editorial board, that the editorial team prepared some questions about how open access could be something beyond this ideal and theoretical idea of it is more democratic, etc. When we are graduate students and we want to get involved, but as Anali mentioned, or someone mentioned about this balance, right? Like to contribute and collaborate, but at the same time, we are constrained for so many things in terms of publications, like, published just in this or those journals, that sometimes is confusing for us as doctoral students, like where to publish, why open access and not the other, but the other is also open access, but I have to pay these APCs. Who is going to give me the money, etc. So all these questions I tried to group in 5 questions, and I'm going to start with the first, and feel free to just jump in and answer who wants to answer. Why is it important to consider accessibility of scientific outputs when we select journals to publish, and how to do it, how to select these journals considering this accessibility or type of access?
I'm going to there are 2 basic strategies here. None of them are ideal, perfect. One is opportunistic. You publish in any place. So there are faculty that will tell you, look at the editorial boards of the journals, look for the impact factor of the journal, and make decisions based on this, the characteristics of the journal, and that works. Basically, that works. I find the opportunistic one strategy that sometimes you need to use, and that's okay. In a more traditional and for me more robust in terms of the scholarly orientation, just select the journal that you admire because the people that you admire or that you are against publish in that journal. You need to contribute to the conversation. You need to contribute to the discussions. If you publish in a journal that you don't read, okay, yeah, you have the opportunity to publish there, okay, go for it. But try to use your research in ways that are responsible to the scientific field, responsible to society, responsible to your own principles of being a good researcher. I'm not stupid. So opportunistic publications, that's part of the process. Okay, but try to select the journals because you like the journal, you read the journal, you review for the journal, and you see people that you either hate or admire. But there has to be something there to a desire to be part of that conversation. In favor of against?
I love, I know Gustavo publishes a lot more than I do. I think I just want to add 2 quick comments to that. I think that it is important to frame your contribution as part of the scholarly conversation. And it's important to remember that you have important contributions. You're publishing and seeking to publish because you have a voice that's worth hearing. And so definitely make sure that you try to get yourself in there and be part of that conversation. As part of that, I also think it's important to think about who your target audience might be. Are there specific groups of people in the world that where your research, your discoveries, what you're sharing may have a particular impact on their work? Since this is an education, the Mary Lou Fulton Teachers College, I know we may be writing for things that you want school teachers to read. Well, we all know they don't get any money, and their libraries don't have any money, and they may have really limited access to journals that have a high subscription cost. And so think about what are some places where we can help make sure that the people who need to read what I've written are going to see it. As part of that strategy, it is important to remember that you can still act on open access. You can still do open access without publishing in an open access journal. Most journal agreements, and maybe we'll talk about copyright in a little while, which is my favorite, but most publishing agreements allow you to self-archive some version of your article in an open access repository. And so take advantage of that. If you can retain that right, make that work openly available, because then you can help reach the audiences that you really want to reach.
Kimberly, you want to add something? No, okay. Great. So yeah, the next question is actually about copyright, and I like how this is flowing because it is actually very common to hear students, but also when we write a paper and say, okay, I selected the paper because I like it, I have this connection, I want to reach this audience, it is important for my research, etc. But the journals have like their conditions, and there is very little space to negotiate about copyrights in general. I would say that the policies are kind of fixed, and there's a reason for that, but sometimes we don't read the copyright, documents and permissions and everything. So my question, or the next question is about this issue. Is open access compatible with intellectual property? This is very common to hear, about this confusion. Will open access still protect my copyright as, the producer, the intellectual producer of that work? And what are your recommendations when it comes to copyright protection in this environment of open access?
Do you mind if I pounce on this one? Copyright is one of my favorite topics. And I will preface this, of course, by saying I am not a lawyer, I am just a librarian. But I work with a lot of lawyers, and I feel confident in the information that I share. One thing to remember is that you as an author, a student at ASU, a faculty member at ASU, you own the copyright to your work. Students own the copyright unless it's something that you've done while working as part of your job at ASU. Faculty own the copyright to the scholarly works they produce. That is, yes, it's kind of part of their job as a faculty member, but it's not like they're not told exactly, like you have to write this thing and publish it here. So there's some things to kind of, I'm not going to go into those weeds. But for the most part, you own the copyright. And what copyright means is that you are the only person who can make copies of your work, who can share and distribute your work, who can make derivative works, so making something new and built off of your work. You're the only person who can publicly perform it, and you're the only person who can publicly display it. So those are the rights that owning copyright holds on to. So all publishers, whether they're open access publishers or traditional paywall journals, need to have some of those rights. They need to have permission from you in order to publish their work. So in a traditionally published journal, you will often receive a copyright transfer agreement or a license to publish agreement. And this will come in a publication contract. Copyright transfer means you are giving up your copyright altogether to the publisher. You no longer have that copyright. The publisher has it, and they have all those rights. Often they will give you back some of them that you have what they call non-exclusive, and that you can do it and they can do it. So sometimes they'll still let you have the right to share your work in certain places or reuse it in a presentation or to build on your future research. Or you may, again, do a license to publish where you keep your copyright, but you give them certain rights. Again, they need some of these rights in order to do their work. So there's nothing wrong with that agreement. The important part is reading it and knowing what you're agreeing to and making sure you keep the rights you need in order to do your work. With open access journals, it's often less complicated because open access tends to publish using a Creative Commons license, which means that you keep your copyright and you keep all of your copyright. But what the journal is asking for is the right to publish your work under this Creative Commons license. You can, there's a variety of Creative Commons licenses. You may note, I'll drop a link here in the chat in just a second. But all of the Creative Commons licenses that are used by open access publishers require attribution. And it is important to note, and this is something I think a lot of people don't understand. Under regular copyright law, there is no requirement by copyright law to provide attribution or cite your sources. That is an academic integrity and plagiarism issue, but not a copyright issue. With a Creative Commons license, that is a legal instrument that requires attribution as part of the license. So by not providing attribution, somebody is actually in violation of that license. And that is a more serious legal thing than just not citing somebody. So whether or not open access protects your copyright, well, you keep your copyright. You know, no matter what, whether it's a traditional publisher, a regular publisher, or an open access publisher, you still own the copyright. The only thing is that perhaps a traditional publisher would like search to make sure nobody's infringing your copyright, or if it's their copyright, they may be the ones to do the legal like takedown or cease or desist or anything, but you still have the right to do that when it's your copyright. So I'll stop at that point, but I hope, I guess okay, really quick, I'm sorry. One last thing to remember though, is that because you are the one that has the content that the journal wants, you are in a position to do a little negotiation. Ask for what you want. The worst thing they can do is say no. They probably won't, most likely will not. Then say, oh no, I can't believe you asked that, we're not gonna publish your article. Because usually by the time you get to that point, you've already gone through a lot of labor. They've already said, this is content we want. It's already gone through the peer review process. You've made all the changes. They're like, we need this to publish our journal. So you're in a good position. They need your stuff in order to publish.
That is so fantastic, Anali. I wish I had known this information when I was a grad student. I'll just supplement what Anali said by telling a quick story that's somewhat related to copyright. So my fourth book just dropped last week. Now, I'm not saying it because, oh, aren't I so amazing like Gustavo that it's my 4th book, but it's taken me 4 books to get to the point of my 5th book, which is supposed to be coming out next year, but we'll see about that. But nevertheless, someone wisely said to me, you should really have a lawyer who has expertise in copyright look at the contract. Again, it's my 5th contract, it's my 5th book. No, I don't want to do that. But something told me I should. And the lawyer's job was, and he explained to me beautifully, not as well as Anali just explained, but copyright and intellectual property. And he explained how any contract, when it deals with copyright issued from typically publishers, is really geared towards protecting publishers' rights, not about the authors, but publishers. And engaging a lawyer, me and this side as the author, to look at a contract and specifically looking at copyright, it's about my rights. And I think it beautifully circles back to what was said earlier, is who's your audience? Because if I hadn't engaged a lawyer and learned and negotiated the contract about copyrights, my audience, at least my intended audience for the next book, would not have gotten access or will not get access to what I'm ultimately hoping to publish.
Just want to congratulations on the 5 books. That's great. But also to add this thing that when we talk about open access in general, we refer to the journals, but as Dr. Scott mentioned at the beginning, we are talking about a whole range of scholarly and scientific products that can be made open access. And one of the products that is perhaps the more traditional product, that is the book. Today, we can make the books open access. There are multiple forms of making books open access. And remembering that open access doesn't mean nobody pays. Somebody has to fund the product. So there is a cost involved always in open access. The point is, how do we make that content as accessible to the relevant audiences as possible? It's going to have a cost. Let's talk who will pay for that. Is the public, are the universities, institutions, multiple payers? There are different things. And copyright, I think that the open access movement, this very broad, diverse movement, has really put the issue of copyright at the center of the discussion, when before you were so happy if a journal published an article from you that they retain all the, it's like lots of my pieces are, well, lots. Some of my pieces, people want to have the translation. And everything that I published before having the Creative Commons licenses, I don't have the rights to authorize the translation of my own work, which is really insane. We produce that, we give it away for free, and somebody else is making money. It's like the publisher requests sometimes $5,000 for translating my work, and I don't receive a penny for that. So again, open access is not the magic bullet that solves everything, but it's pretty helpful in these issues.
Thank you so much for all your brilliant points, because it's, again, it's like opening the black box and seeing that all the complexities involve all the actors too. And that's why also I wanted to reach out to students, right? Like, we are part of this big machine of producing knowledge in form of manuscripts and in other forms, but I think we should all reflect on all of these, and not see the situations that we face in terms of the difficulties that we have for publishing, as they are already there and we cannot change anything, right? I think it is important to say that, yeah, there are some other pathways and like strategies. And by the way, I would like to share that Anali had created some live guides for open access. So, and the ASU library has like some resources that are very interesting to check. So go ahead and look at the library guides. And well, since we are kind of running out of time, I would like to make some announcements before going to maybe a last question or our last round of questions. And it is that Larry is here in the chat, and she's gonna share a form for students, doctoral students from Mary Lou Fulton Teachers College or other schools. If we have in the participants like people from other schools too, we are inviting you to join our journal, the CIE journal, as reviewers, as peer reviewers, and like also editors for the students in our college. So Blair is just share the Google form link. So feel free to fill it and let us know if you want to join us. So I just want to say that even though it is a very hard work, as you all mentioned, doing this gatekeeping work of like reading manuscripts and doing the peer review, etc., it is also very like it is very enriching for your professional development, I would say. Here in the journal, we are learning how to make or how to give feedback in a more thorough way and like constructive and like helping for authors, because at the end of the day, we see the journal not just as a, you know, a machine that produces papers, but as an educational agency that can help everyone to publish better and like for the better of the audience, for the better of their careers, etc. So we are inviting students to join us because we have some like training sessions and materials that we are constantly using to become better reviewers and better editors, which is one of the goals of our careers. So yeah, just please feel free to fill it or just reach to us. We have the email in the website, so anyone can reach out. So the last question, this is about what you foresee, like what changes or improvements do you foresee in the adoption of open access in educational research or in general? But since we are here in Teachers College, I think it is important to think about like the specificity of materials that in educational research are needed and for practitioners too, etc. So some of your reflections, please.
As you know, making predictions is one of the things that we are really horrible. So I'm going to, you know, try to speculate about the possibilities. But one of the one of the possibilities that is being discussed and it appears to gain some momentum is that open access will be open access with some form of institutional support. The institutions that the authors belong will be the ones paying the article processing charges. That seems to be pretty much accepted in many parts of Europe with one plan that is called the Plan S that has lots and lots of problems and it's been discussed. But this idea of the article processing charges is in the commercially dominated scholarly environment that is the most countries in Europe or the countries belonging to OECD, plus the US, Canada, Australia, the scholarly community seems to be accepting article processing charges. The Global South is completely against. India, Latin America, many countries in Asia, and almost all the countries in Africa. There are some exceptions because they have some agreement with the European Commission, but in general, we would say it's a global North versus global South around the issue of article processing charges as the open access way and publicly funded open access in the global South. I think that the word is unfair. Imperialism and colonialism are pretty much alive. There are racist policies here. There are other forms of discrimination that still matter. But that is what I see is going to happen because the paywall journals are losing money. So we are talking about money. And by the way, this is a gigantic industry that produces pretty good profits. So in the field of education, the situation is even more complicated because there are lots and lots of companies that are producing journals that pretend to be open access, but they are just charging for publications without any real editorial process or any rigor. So there are thousands of those journals right now. So it's a very difficult moment. I think that we are in the middle of the fight. Hopefully the global South model will prevail. I hope so, but I'm not super optimistic there.
Well, I'll try to be more optimistic, but I do want to recognize what I anticipate is going to happen in direct response to the question. So I'm going to guess that more money is going to go to specific disciplines or institutions that are underfunded, and that monies will be used in that realm in order to help give more communities that have been under-resourced access to contribute to open access. What I'd like to see is that the monies are more equitably distributed. So not equally distributed, but equitably distributed. I also guess that we're going to see, as open access becomes more and more in the dominant discourse, I think we're going to see a greater diversity of resources become available. Okay. What I'd like to see, however, is that we're going to see a diversity of ideas. And I'm not sure if simply having open access is going to lead to a diversity of ideas being heard. They could be presented, but that doesn't mean people are hearing them and doing anything about them, more or less using those ideas to change the system. And then lastly, I think we're going to see more authors taking opportunity of the open access efforts, and that's great. But what I'd like to see is more accountability on the predatory folk who are really replicating the same model as for-profit in higher education institutions. I'd like to see that we take a careful look at what happened with the for-profit institutions that preyed on particularly communities of color and took their money, increased their debt long-term, and then students ended up with nothing, a degree that means nothing. And I would hate that open access is another opportunity where that can happen. So that's me.
I think that's really an important point, Kim, about not perpetuating some of these really predatory and discriminatory practices. I think, you know, when I look at maybe what I foresee is hopefully more and more researchers and scholars and community hobbyists and citizen scientists to all recognize that they participate in this scholarly communication landscape. It's not just about open access. It's all about how we communicate and share and understand the knowledge of each other and the world around us. And so a big piece of that is, how do we talk to one another? How do we communicate information in ways that people are going to understand and really internalize and learn from, which for education majors is a really important piece, right? And then also, how do we, this is what I hope and I think will fundamentally need to happen in order for anything related to open access to become much more broadly adopted, is we fundamentally have to rethink the way we measure impact for scholarship, for evaluation, funding, and promotion and tenure. All of the impact metrics are broken and they are inequitable and they don't work and they don't actually represent the real impact of a person's work. And so those are some of the questions that we have to figure out. And you know, some institutions are already working on this. There's the DORA Declaration, which I encourage you to look up. I'll put a link. We've got so much stuff that talks about really critically re-examining how we measure research impact. And I think that that is important moving forward.
Thank you very much for your very inspiring visions, and thank you for you know, looking at this problem also from the optimistic and both the pessimistic ways, because we need to complement both and to say, yeah, it is not easy to do it, but we can do it. So thank you very much for joining us, to all our participants. We're gonna share our social media. If Blair can help me share our Twitter account. We have an email too, for you, if you, in case you're interested to join the journal. We have a LinkedIn account, and in Twitter we are constantly sharing some calls, invitations, and information about what we are publishing. Thank you very much for our panelists, and I hope we can enjoy another, like, part 2 of this conversation one day, maybe in person, who knows. Thank you very much for your time, and follow also the Center for Gender and Equity in Science and Technology, the library guides too, and Gustavo has in the ASU iSearch his research. And if you want to, you know, reach out to them, also contact us and we can give you their emails.